I declare open the informal interactive hearing of the high-level dialogue on interreligious and intercultural understanding and cooperation for peace. This hearing is aimed at strengthening efforts of interreligious and intercultural understanding and cooperation by engaging a variety of actors and constituents, especially in governments, civil society and the United Nations system. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this interactive hearing of the General Assembly involving civil society, non-governmental organizations and the private sector. And to know that so many leading experts in the field of interreligious and intercultural cooperation representing diverse regions, sectors, cultures, religions and perspectives joined this hearing. At the opening of the high-level dialogue this morning, many delegations noted the importance of initiating a multifaceted dialogue that promotes unity in diversity and replaces misunderstanding with mutual understanding and acceptance. Indeed, I believe that the commitment to interfaith and intercultural dialogue is a valuable asset in setting up a new culture of international relations based on human security, human rights, the responsibility to protect and sustainable development. Active involvement of the media, private sector, civil society, faith groups and NGOs is essential. Your expertise and outreach is critical if we are to spread the message of peace. Indeed, at the United Nations, we realize the intrinsic value of the role civil society plays in fostering lasting peace, promoting tolerance and mutual respect. I would like to congratulate you all for the work that you have already undertaken to spread these principles at times under the most daunting of circumstances and encourage you to continue your good work. Let me also take this opportunity to highlight the importance of involving the private sector as an important partner in achieving these goals. The nature of the global economy and your commitment to corporate social responsibility has opened up a whole range of opportunities to promote intercultural cooperation, for example, through new technologies and entrepreneurship, joint venture initiatives and foreign direct investment, and in the increasingly multinational composition of your organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to acknowledge the Civil Society Task Force, the Committee of Religious NGOs, UNFPA, the Alliance of Civilizations, and UNESCO for their invaluable contributions to the organization of this hearing. In addition, I wish to extend special thanks to the government of the State of Kuwait for their generosity, also to the NGO DPI Executive Committee, the Conference of NGOs, and the Guérin Hermès Foundation for Peace for helping to make today's hearing possible. In looking forward to the fruitful exchange of this meeting, I would like to underscore my appreciation for the vital partnership between Member States and civil society on a whole range of issues on our agenda. Let us continue our collaboration regularly throughout the 62nd session of the General Assembly. I am now pleased to invite Mr. Iqbal Riza to deliver a few remarks on behalf of Mr. Jorge Sampaio, High Representative for the Alliance of Civilizations. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first I have to convey to you President Sampaio's deep regrets that due to an illness, fortunately not at all serious, he is unable to be with you today. he was very much looking forward to this occasion. In fact, he left New York on Friday and was flying back again just for this meeting. I shall now read his statement. So I'd just like to clarify that any reference to the first person, singular here, refers to President Sampaio and not to me. Thank you. Now this is the start of the statement, of the message. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. First of all, let me thank the President of the General Assembly, Dr. Sirjan Kerim, for holding this important debate on interreligious and intercultural understanding, and for giving me the opportunity to address this distinguished audience. Many urgent issues have been debated at the General Assembly over the last 2 weeks, including global warming, peace and security, human rights, and global poverty. But this debate is of particular relevance because it demonstrates that the need to address growing cultural and religious tensions in the world is being recognized at the highest level. As the primary purpose of the United Nations is to deal with international peace and security, there is no doubt that it has a lead role to play in addressing the growing polarization between cultures and societies as a source of conflict in an age threatened by the clash of civilizations. In this regard, it is of key importance to ensure a close coordination between all the activities carried out by the key United Nations entities involved in the field of interreligious and intercultural dialogue. We need to ensure unity of purpose to these diverse activities and the cumulative impact of coordinated action. This is the reason that I am here today as the High Representative of the Alliance of Civilizations. In this capacity, allow me to brief you on the ministerial meeting of the Alliance of Civilizations Group of Friends held last week. Let me emphasize that the participants in that meeting showed a strong commitment to improve cross-cultural relations. In particular, the ministers showed strong support for initiatives in the areas of media, youth and education to reduce cultural misunderstandings. I have made to them a set of suggestions, namely the development by international organizations and bodies of charts for partnering with the Alliance, the development by countries of their own national strategy for cross-cultural dialogue, the appointment by countries and international organizations and bodies of a coordinator responsible both for the implementation of the chart and to ensure internal coordination, as well as to serve as a focal point in relations with the Alliance's Secretariat and other partners. Also, I have urged them to take advantage of the first annual forum of the Alliance, which will be held next January in Madrid, to make a major step forward and present to public opinion their commitments and deliverables in line with those suggestions. States, of course, are the building blocks of the United Nations. But non-state actors, such as non-governmental organizations, the private sector, voluntary and civic organizations, local communities, churches and other conventional organizations, and also other stakeholders, have been very active and influential, and indeed are key partners for promoting a global alliance for peace. This is why this afternoon's hearing with civil society is of great relevance, as it will help to highlight some of the most innovative projects developed by civil society groups to build bridges between cultures. Of course, some of the most intractable conflicts afflicting the world today cannot be addressed without a strong political will. But the role played by religious communities and civil society organizations in building the conditions for peace at the grassroots level is of key importance. There is another reason why I look forward to today's debate. I am sure that the ideas that will be emerging from your discussions will help to inform the work of the Alliance of Civilizations. I shall be listening with great interest as you put forward practical initiatives that help to improve cross-cultural relations globally. We will be looking for ways to support that work in close collaboration with our network of partners, including member states and civil society organizations, and within the UN system, UNESCO, and the Tripartite Forum on Interfaith Cooperation for Peace. I wish you much success in your deliberations, and I thank you. End of President Sampaio's message. Thank you.
I thank the Special Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on the Alliance of Civilizations. This interactive hearing shall comprise two panels. The first panel, entitled Challenges of Interreligious and Intercultural Cooperation Today, will be moderated by Dr. William Wendley, Secretary General, World Conference of Religions for Peace. The second panel, entitled Best Practices and Strategies of Interreligious and Intercultural Cooperation Going Forward, will be moderated by His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Ahmed Mohammed Al-Murad, Permanent Representative of Kuwait to the United Nations. The two panels will take place consecutively for approximately 1.5 hours each. Due to time constraints, for the panel discussions, I wish to inform our distinguished participants that the full statements of the speakers and the respondents will be posted on the website of the President of the General Assembly. Panel 1 will begin momentarily. I invite Dr. William Wendley to moderate this first panel.
Well, good afternoon, esteemed representatives of states, of United Nations agencies, civil society organizations, cultural organizations, and religious communities. As was mentioned, I'm Dr. William Wendley. I have the honor of assisting us, serving us this afternoon as your moderator. I begin with a word of very sincere thanks to the President of the General Assembly for his opening remarks and the statement made by Mr. Iqbal Riza, Special Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on the Alliance of Civilizations. I'll begin with a very, very brief remark. I'm then going to share with you a few remarks on our procedure this afternoon, one that has been noted by the President of the General Assembly, which is challenged because of time. And then we'll go quite directly into what I believe is a very important first session. Clearly, we are in this room, as was noted in the remarks of the President of the General Assembly, because of the challenges of peace. The clear recognition that governments have a principal, cardinal role in addressing those problems but that all of us are stakeholders, and that in fact in each of us we find unique assets. Surely in the cultures themselves there are priceless cultural assets absolutely pertinent to the achievement of peace, to the achievement of the common good. When we think of our religious communities, the headlines of the newspapers highlight again and again the ways in which they are tragically at times hijacked against their own deepest principles and purposes. And yet those close to these communities know and know profoundly that they have exquisite social, moral, and indeed spiritual assets that can contribute to the common good. So we're here this afternoon to assess the way governments, cultures, religious communities can be in alliance in the most profound sense for the common good. A note on procedure. I would like at the end of the afternoon to give the Nobel Award. You will hear the lovely sound of the bell. This bell will have to be used, I think, to help us forward. We have 5 remarkable panelists. We have 5 respondents, and we have a house full of deeply committed persons. I'm going to ask the panelists who have written papers and have spent their lives in a way preparing for this afternoon to offer their remarks in 5 minutes. And at 4.5 minutes, I'm going to give a very gentle sound of a bell. And at 5 minutes, I would ask them to conclude their sentences. I'll then turn directly to those who have been designated as our respondents. And our respondents are invited to not respond to all panelists, but to make a major point that they feel is important. Dear respondents, you have 2 minutes, as you have been pre-alerted, and I hope that each of you qualify for the Nobel Award. I will then have the great pleasure to open this to the entire floor, and as we conclude, we'll turn back to our panelists. Should you have a question to the panelists, they will be given 1 minute at the end of this session to either respond to a remark that has been made or to point a comment towards how we are challenged to go forward. So, esteemed parties all in this room, allow me now to extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished speakers and respondents. I'm going to note them and then turn one by one for their interventions. We have first Ms. Gulvaria Shermatova, and Ms. Shermatova is the director of Laraveltil Information and Education Network of the Indigenous Peoples of Russia. We have beside her Professor Paul Nitter. Professor Nitter is the Paul Tillich Professor of Theology, World Religions and Culture at the Union Theological Seminary here in the United States of America, New York. We have Professor Gamal Serur here. He is the director of the International Islamic Center for Population Studies and Research at the Al-Azhar Center of Egypt. We have beside him Dr. Sohan Lal Gandhi, president of the Anu Virat Global Organization of India. And beside him we have Imam Mohammed Nuran Ashafa. He's the joint executive director of the Interfaith Mediation Center of Nigeria. I'm going to mention our respondents, and then we'll go directly to our panelists. Our respondents may raise their hand if they wish. Mr. Manuel Manoneles will be our first respondent. Mr. Talif Dean will be our second. Professor Ileso Mercado will be our third. Reverend Judith Van Ostal will be our fourth, and Miss Katie Sarer will be our fifth. Allow me then, with these very brief introductions for these remarkable people, to invite you, please, to begin us this afternoon. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am the president of an interregional organization, Lorovetlian, which brings together more than 20 of Russia's indigenous peoples. It is a great honor for me to open our dialogue on the issue of interaction and cooperation between representatives of different cultures and religions. The path of democratic reforms which Russia is taking provides a broad understanding of the problems of the coexistence of different cultures. A particular role in Russian society is played by indigenous peoples. At the level of the federal government and the regions in Russia, there is a policy of support for indigenous peoples. A number of relevant laws have been adopted and positive measures have been implemented. The rights of indigenous peoples are enshrined in the Constitution of the Russian Federation. Article 69 guarantees respect for the rights of small indigenous peoples in accordance with universally recognized principles and norms of international law and international agreements. The three special laws that were adopted in the Russian Constitution should ensure the rights of indigenous peoples to land, their traditional way of life, promote the preservation and development of their culture. But unfortunately, the lack of mechanisms to implement laws limits their influence on social, economic life and cultural life of society. Education is constructed as a means to support the political course in the country, not cultures of indigenous peoples. Culture, for its part, is a cult of those values on the basis of which the primary issues in our lives are decided. And if you think about, they are human values. I think that it is only at this level that our dialogue should take place today. In order to understand my thoughts more fully, look at the global campaign of indigenous peoples for their rights. The fact that the General Assembly adopted a declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples on September 13th of this year is proof of the strength that the movement can take on, as well as an understanding of the historical importance of culture. The basis of the global immersions of indigenous peoples is not shared aspirations for political or economic supremacy, but common responsibility for the fate of their peoples, both at the personal level and the historical level. In an era of globalization, which for us indigenous peoples brings with it a break from traditional knowledge, culture, the violation of rights to traditional land use, denial of the rights to the land of our ancestors, a particular role here is played by the United Nations. In recent years, ties between the UN and the community of indigenous peoples has undergone significant changes. A permanent forum on indigenous issues was created. A special rapporteur on the human rights and fundamental freedoms of indigenous peoples was created, and a second decade for indigenous peoples has been declared. In our view, we must continue working on establishing mechanisms for direct bilateral ties at all levels between traditional leadership bodies of indigenous communities, such as councils of elders, and UN agencies. It is necessary for the development of the political orientation with regard to indigenous peoples, both in Russia and in the world, to take place with the broad participation of traditional leadership bodies of indigenous peoples, so that the voice of those who truly represented indigenous peoples will be heard at the highest level. As an indigenous woman, I would like to ask everyone a question. What is truly the meaning and not the outward form of our dialogue? After all, belonging to a certain ethnicity or religious group does not provide an understanding of one's role in the world, but rather it is individual responsibility for one's own people. Without this, you will not exist as an individual nor as a historical entity. It is only this perception that makes it possible to justify the goals which take precedence over personal ones, which are fulfilled within the framework of any culture, and which are the connection which allow us to talk in different languages about common problems. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. You received the Nobel Award. Congratulations. Yeah. Let's turn now to you, Professor Paul Nitter, please.
Thank you. I'm very happy and honored and humbled to be here. I offer my comments in four brief theses. Thesis one, unless the religions are part of the solution, they will continue to be part of the problem. I think this is obvious. The religions, as Dr. Vendley remarked, are part of the problem. They are a source of conflict and violence among nations and ethnic groups. This is not to say that the religions are the cause or the fundamental reason for the conflict, but they do play a decisive role in the conflict. The religions are being used by leaders and politicians to inspire hatred of the enemy other and to strengthen commitment in fighting the enemy. Thesis two, the religions must be part of the solution together, not separately. The problem we are facing is one that touches all religions, admittedly some more than others. To identify the causes of violence within one's own religion, one needs the help of other religions who can be critical of us in ways that we are unable to be critical of ourselves. Now, such interreligious cooperation and dialogue must take place primarily on the grassroots level. High-level understanding and harmony are relatively easy. The challenge and the promise of dialogue are on the community level of villages and neighborhoods. Now, such dialogue is already going on, but it needs to be strengthened. Thesis number three, to be part of the solution, religions must confront why they are part of the problem. Now, here it gets a little bit hard. It is not enough, I would suggest, indeed it's too facile and can serve as an excuse simply to announce that the extremists are not true Christians, or they're not real Muslims, or they're not true Buddhists. It is not enough to say that such religious perpetrators of violence don't belong to our community. They are part of our community. They claim to be. And especially they draw on their reasons and their justification for hatred and violence from the same sacred texts and teachings that we use. These texts and these teachings that are being used to justify violence must be recognized, I suggest, and dealt with as part of the religious dialogue. Thesis four. One of the key reasons, now we're getting to analysis, one of the key reasons why religions are so easily exploited for purposes of hatred and violence is because each religion makes claims to be superior over all other religions. In different ways, all or most religious traditions assert that they were given or that they attained the only or the highest or the final truth for all humankind. So while each religion will recognize the reality of the others, I don't think that they are able to recognize the permanent validity of the other religions. Why? Because they believe that ultimately God or the transcendent wants everyone to be a Christian, or wants everyone to be a Muslim or a Buddhist, or they believe that God has privileged them to stand above all the others. Now this would be like trying to organize the United Nations around only one nation that claims to have the only or the final word on how the world should be organized. Now, I am not saying that claims of superiority naturally or necessarily lead to conflict or violence. The fundamental originating causes of religious violence are usually economic. but I am proposing that such claims of superiority provide handles or opportunities by which political or ethnic leaders can turn religion into a weapon of violence. So I conclude the religions must offer the world a model of an egalitarian community of communities, in which the unique validity and value of each community, each religion are affirmed and engaged, but no religion claims to be superior or dominant over all the others. Only in this way, I believe, can the religions truly attain a lasting peace among themselves, and only in this way can they foster peace among the nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Knitter. Let us turn now to you, Professor Sarur, please.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, Mr. Chairman, I wish to share with you. Thank you. I wish to share with you our experience at a faith-based partnership at the International Islamic Center for Population Studies and Research at Al-Azhar University, as well as at the Federation of International Gynecology and Obstetrics, which is a professional volunteer organization, the challenges we met and the progress we made. First, the Al-Azhar University, Al-Azhar Mosque was first opened for prayers on the 7th of Ramadan, the year 972, and the scholar activities started at Al-Azhar in the year 1975. And at that time, the Chief Justice, Abu Hassan Ali ibn Nu'man, sat in the court of Al-Azhar and read Al-Ikhtisar, which is a book was written by his father, Abu Hanif al-Nu'man, and this was the first of the start of the Al-Azhar University. Such activities culminated later on in the foundation of Al-Azhar University, which became known later in the East and West as the oldest Islamic university, more than 1,000 years old. Al-Azhar University accepted students from more than 50 Muslim countries and Muslim communities all over the world. Some of its graduates became ministers, head of states in different Muslim countries. For all these reasons, the UNFPA very early in the year 1975 agreed to establish a collaboration with Al-Azhar University at the International Islamic Center for Population Studies and Research at Al-Azhar, right in the middle of Al-Azhar University, next door to Al-Azhar Mosque. The center extends its activities to the Muslim communities and institutions all over the world. Today, the center activities included dispelling misconception about Islam and family planning and population policy, developing a population education curriculum, bioethics curriculum and guidelines, infertility treatment center, including assisted reproductive technology, reproductive and sexual health courses, and providing study tours and fellowship for students from Muslim and non-Muslim countries from USA, Russia, Asia, and Africa. These activities would not have been possible without the collaboration with various donors, including UNFPA, UNICEF, UNESCO, WHO, Ford Foundation, USAID, IDRC Canada, DANIDA, Denmark, GTZ, Germany, ISESCO, Islamic Organization of Education, Science and Culture, and African Faith-Based Organization and African Regional Sexuality Resource Center. During its lifetime of 30 years, the center encountered obstacles in implementing its activities. To mention but a few, first, its credibility in Egypt and the Muslim world, getting support of the policymakers and top officials at Al-Azhar University, convincing religious leaders to collaborate and be so effective and instrumental in all its activities in country as well as all over the world, and also its relationship with the donors. Constant open dialogue and equal compromise flexibility on unacceptability of either side and embracing cultural differences as foundation of scientific development were key elements in overcoming all these problems. On the other hand, at the other federation, which is the FIGO, which is a volunteer professional organization dedicated to women's and newly born health, which has 113 member societies around the world. Priority areas of its action of the Federation and its committee are directly related to the unacceptable burden of preventable diseases, including sexually transmitted diseases, AIDS, maternal and neonatal mortality and morbidity, global ethics, human reproduction and women's health, combating gynecological malignancy, women's sexual and reproductive rights, and capacity building of buildings of member societies. This could be done through collaboration with the UN agencies, including WHO, FIGO Women's Health Alliance, UNFPA, Ford Foundation, and other organizations, and also the Canadian Society of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Further support from UNFPA, WHO, UNICEF will help FIGO in combating its fight against maternal mortality and morbidity, unsafe abortion, obstetric fistula, female genital mutilation, and improvement of the newborn health. For successful cooperation between donors and recipients at faith-based institutions and also at an international professional volunteer organization, our experience had shown that there are certain elements to be on the side of the donor, and these, the donor understanding of cultural religious contexts of typically more traditional recipient, non-hierarchy of the cultural and religious values, non-practicability and non-acceptability of one-size-fits-all solutions, and understanding that local populations need to be convinced and not coerced, accepting major structural change, especially if it is from foreign source, respect of the recipient's freedom to reject some of the changes that are unacceptable from a cultural or religious perspective. But also, there are other important issues on the recipient side, and these include reconciliation of necessity to implement certain changes, improvement with necessity to be sensitive cultural and religious values, responsibility, burden to re-educate local population to be able to embrace scientific development as non-threatening to culture and religion values, and this may imply challenge to some of the very core social beliefs, and finally, ability to recognize inadequacy of some of the current local solutions and not view all Western involvement as interference with domestic affairs and culture. Mr. Chairman, may I say that no doubt the collaboration of all concerned actors and the commitment of policymakers and the governments and auditing our progress to identify success and failures are key elements in our battle for peace. Thank you.
Professor Sirur, we thank you. Let us now turn to you, Dr. Gandhi, please.
Mr. Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, we are confronted with a great challenge of bringing religious leaders together. Ironically, religion is there to unite the people, to make them live a good moral life. But unfortunately, it is in the forefront of discord and hatred in the world today. In a situation such as this, how can we bring the religious leaders together? First of all, I begin by paying a tribute to the United Nations General Assembly for declaring Mahatma Gandhi's birthday as the World Nonviolence Day. I want to say that the basis of religious understanding and cooperation is nothing but nonviolence. If we switch over to a nonviolent lifestyle, if we begin to respect the views expressed by other people, and if we refrain from contradicting the beliefs prevalent among other societies, definitely we will be moving towards religious reconciliation and the world will be free from hatred and conflict. In this respect, I want to say that it is because of our tendency to prove the superiority of our religious tradition, we sometimes indulge in disparaging and contradicting the statements made by other spiritual leaders. That creates great conflict. In this respect, I want to refer to the message of Lord Mahavira, who was a contemporary of Buddha, and he said that many religious leaders say, come to my religion and you will be liberated. If you do not practice our religious rituals, you will not be liberated. Such persons are creating misunderstanding and are only living in an illusion. Mahavira said that all religious beliefs are true and all might be wrong from someone's point of view. So in order to insist on a partial truth to be the absolute truth, when we start creating conflict, then the violence begins and we are not in a position to live peacefully and coexist. Therefore, he propounded the theory of non-absolutist attitude, anekanta. That is, you might be true from your point of view, but others might also be true from another point of view. We know only the partial truth, and it is wrong and unethical to insist on the partial truth being the whole truth. Only the omniscient beings know the whole truth, and we only know the partial truth. The difficulty is then when we start asserting that what we have said is absolutely right. This attitude is at the root of all conflicts, particularly the religious conflicts in the world. Therefore, Lord Mahavira said that we should try to have a non-absolutist attitude towards others. That is, we should never try to contradict the belief of any religion. Therefore, in the Jain religious tradition, there has been a vow not to criticize other religious traditions and never to utter even a word against the prevalent belief. So this attitude of non-absolutist attitude might definitely usher in an era of peace and happiness. I would also refer to one particular dimension of Lord Mahavira's Anekant philosophy, that is Acharya Mahapragya, who is continuing the legacy of the non-violent tradition of Mahavira, who has embarked upon Ahimsa Yatra to create awareness among the people, among the masses. I'm very happy to say that his Ahimsa Yatra has received support from all religious leaders, including the Muslims, the Sikhs, the Hindus, and they are all united under one banner, and that is Ahimsa. If Ahimsa becomes a way of life, and if it is embedded in religious philosophy, the world will certainly be free from religious conflicts. Thank you very much.
Dr. Gandhi, we thank you. Let's turn now to you, Imam Muhammad Ashafa, please.
Distinguished brothers and sisters of faith, I greet each and every one of us with a greeting of peace by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu, meaning may the peace and blessing of Almighty be upon you all. Today, in this historical occasion, I certainly feel honored to have a privilege to discuss at this General Assembly. So in the name of Almighty Allah, who created the universe and a cultural pluralism that triggered the quest for cultural universalism, which manifestation we witness today in this historical occasion on the issue of challenge of interreligious and intercultural cooperation in our world today. The General Assembly Resolution A61221 is the most desirable tool in this century to checkmate Huntington theory of clash of civilizations, which seems to be marching toward reality. The need for us as citizens of the world to identify the culture of peace to replace the culture of war, the culture of cooperation to obliterate the culture of disintegration, and the culture of justice to suppress the culture of injustice, and the culture of love to replace the culture of hate. Within our interreligious and intercultural world of experience and traditions, and consequently, evolve a culture of universalism that will be acceptable to all citizens of the world across the hierarchy of human family, from the diplomatic circles to the grassroots level where I belong. As a peace practitioner, working directly, looking at the challenges at the grassroots level and the local community level, at the challenge of interreligious cooperation and interreligious dialogue, I foresee in my own worldview that one of the greatest barriers to interreligious dialogue have been the idea for us to identify, to know that religion is like a nuclear energy, which can be used positively and at the same time can be used negatively. Distinguished brothers and sisters, and this informs the misinterpretation of our scriptural text by those incapable scholars and overzealous religious leaderships on issue of identifying scriptural text that seems to promote hate, that seems to promote violence, that seems to promote war, and even glorifications of demonization of the other. Distinguished brothers and sisters, the media is not left out, but the media and the film industry disregard for the sensitivity of our religious and cultural traditions has also impaired on the aspect of having a barrier in having a perfect interreligious and cultural understanding in our world today. The fear of losing our religious and cultural identity in a globalized world is also a factor that we need to look into, if indeed we need to find a way forward in our own world today. Of course, the lack of effective responsiveness of the United Nations agencies and its major stakeholders to crises that have a universal consequences in our world, especially the UN lack of effective political will to conclude 60 years of all unfinished intervention in the Middle East, the Israeli-Palestinian crisis specifically. The religious dimension of those particular crises has served as accelerating and sustaining factor for our intercultural understanding today. And it serves as a breeding ground for both formal and informal state-sponsored acts of terrorism in our world today. Distinguished brothers and sisters, for me, a battle line has been drawn between the extreme Islamist and the extreme Democrat on the other side of the divide. And these two parallel line extremists have created for us an unsafe world for us to live in. And that informs the second aspect, where it is becoming difficult to have a clear definition, drawing a line between who is a freedom fighter and who is indeed a terrorist. Distinguished brothers and sisters, the lack of IEC materials is another factor of the culture of universalism, in which here I strongly believe we have a strong factor that we need to work all together collectively to save our world from the dilemma it finds itself. Distinguished brothers and sisters, I strongly wish to recommend that the UN needs to study some of various modules that have worked at community level and regional level, and not to stay within the diplomatic ball game in this magnificent building, to see how can those manifestations, how can those modules make effective contribution to sustaining our world and creating a new reorientation for our youth who have been the vanguard, the foot soldiers used in creating social discord within our traditional world. Distinguished brothers, in our own part of the world, the Kaduna modules have been a very effective tool of interfaith cooperations. And I strongly believe this House can closer look at that particular one and what gave birth to the Andalusian modules, which are other modules that have worked in history and that need to work today in our own part of the world. So I conclude by saying, as long as man cannot find peace with Almighty God, mankind cannot have peace within himself. And as so long as mankind has no peace within himself, his neighbor and environment could not witness the peace and tranquility we desire for. Thank you very much.
Imam Ashafa and all of the panelists, we thank you for not only remarks, but your ability to compress your delivery in such an effective way. So please accept our gratitude for that. We turn now to our respondents. Mr. Manuel Menonels, please lead us. You have 2 minutes to model a response for us, please.
Okay. Gracias, señor moderador.
Thank you, moderator. Basically, there's two types of complementary contributions I'd like to make, which I hope will be complementary and interesting, both to what was said this afternoon and to what was said this morning in plenary. The first has to do about the challenges, as we were asked to do in the guidelines, and the second as regards the actors. Turning to the challenges, which I think we should look at perceptions versus reality. We live in an interconnected global society that is defined as a screen-driven society, driven by the screens of our televisions, our computers, our third-generation cell phones. But very often the importance of perceptions overrides the reality itself. As a result, some people have a notion about a clash of civilization, which, if it did exist, I would call a clash of ignorances and misunderstandings. This is more the effect of perception than reality. So I think we have to work in a twofold dimension all the time. We have to face real problems, what have been discussed so far, but we should also work on the perception of those problems and how those perceptions are generated. And here, stereotypes, misunderstanding, spin, all kinds of manipulation of language has a great deal to do, and the Alliance of Civilizations can do a great deal. Now, on the other hand, there could be a work in parallel on perceptions and reality, and the most important part would be that of the media. The Alliance of Civilizations has issued a lot of recommendations, as has Resolution 61221. And then in the field of education, what is called media literacy, in other words, education about the media, but also education about religion and culture. And in conclusion, I'd like to refer to a type of actor that I think is very important. We must involve local actors and regional actors. These actors and these institutions are the ones that encounter reality on a day-to-day basis, cope with problems, and in many cases are already carrying out intercultural management and mediation, including in intercultural, interreligion conflicts. And that is why I think these two topics are so important. Perceptions on the one hand, and then when we talk about agents, let's bring in the educational authorities and the regional and local authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let us turn now to you, Mr. Talif Deen, please.
I want to respond to two observations that were made today. One was Imam Ashafa, who drew attention to the direct role of the media and its insensitivity to religious and cultural values. And also this morning, the President of the General Assembly, in his statement, he said the success of the global dialogue on interreligious and intercultural cooperation rests on the active involvement of the media. As I'm speaking today in my capacity as UN Bureau Chief of Interpress Service News Agency, and as most of you know, we in the media have been accused by some of being responsible, either wittingly or unwittingly, and I think mostly unwittingly, of making preemptive judgments on issues relating to religious and ethnic issues. I will just cite you a few examples as a practitioner of the art. When the Oklahoma City bombing took place in August 1995, the initial press reports and the stories that hit the wire attributed the bombing to local groups linked to Middle East terrorist groups, and they were proved wrong. But the damage had been done. That bombing, as you know, was by a group of homegrown militias. And also there have been several other examples in an attempt perhaps to beat the competitors. Some of the wire services have always been rushing into judgment. And I was just picking up some random samples. After a bombing in Europe a couple of years ago, one of the wire service stories read, and I quote, a voice in broken English and with an Arabic accent claimed responsibility for the bombing. And a second story about a bomb threat, I think against an American military base in Germany. And the story said a man called the US air base in Germany and threatened to attack it. And the next sentence read, speaking German, possibly with a Russian or Turkish accent. And it went on, But these, I think, are judgmental statements, and there are plenty of them in circulation. The tragedy of it is that in most instances they are proved wrong, and the erroneous statements may well have created irreparable damage to religious groups and ethnic groups. And I thought I'll bring this, and probably we can debate this as to how we can resolve this problem. Thank you.
Professor Mercado, please.
One of the impacts of globalization is the movement of peoples across borders and frontiers. But today there's diversity of faith communities, migrants, overseas workers, or simply temporary visitors within our traditionally monoculture and monofaith community. And this is precisely what Imam Ashafa said of pluralism. But pluralism can lead, yes, to clash of civilizations or to dialogue and solidarity of civilizations. Perhaps this is the bipolarity of religions. And because of this, I would like to address myself directly to Paul Neiter when he said, we are part of the problem or part of the solutions. The first is the minority rights, the religious minority rights or ethnic minority in our borders and our frontiers. We need the political will to defend and safeguard their rights not only to the worship, whether they are overseas workers, migrants, or temporary visitors, their rights to their land and to their ethnicity. The second, which is very important, is that government and religious leaders must take to promote interreligious dialogue and protections of these rights. The Philippine government said this morning that one of its programs precisely is the promotion of interreligious dialogue, particularly of the minority and the indigenous people, and they have shown the way. The second very important is mentioned also by Neiter is on the religious extremism within our faith communities. We can no longer remain silent in the reality of extremism within our faith communities. I'll quote from John Paul II, and this is an important quotation perhaps. It is our ardent hope that we no longer present our communities as communities in conflict, but communities of respectful dialogue and never more in conflict. We have to teach our young people the way of respect and understanding so that they will not be led to misuse religion itself to promote or justify hatred and violence. We can no longer kill or destroy in the name of God or in the name of religions. We have to confront this squarely as religious leaders and as political leaders within our faith community traditions. And lastly, we need to show the new tradition of faith traditions, and that is solidarity and partnership toward peace and development. And perhaps the best milieu to show this solidarity is our partnership in realizing the 8 Millennium Development Goals, as well as the Monterey Consensus on the financing of development. And in conclusion, today we celebrate the Feast of St. Francis, and St. Francis was able to recognize in the Sultan at Damietta, in his time, in the midst of conflict and war, to call the Sultan his brother. Perhaps today more than ever, we have to recognize in each other, in diversity of religions, the brother or the sister among ourselves. A fellowship of mankind, fellowship of civilization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mercado. Reverend Judith Van Ostel, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to just begin a word from the Hebrew Bible. Without a vision, the people perish, from Proverbs. And I think what we're hearing is a vision lifted up, a vision that's a shared vision. and a vision that calls us together around a common goal. A vision that is a commitment to a common cause with those identified as outside of the structures of powers. And I think we also hear that there's wonderful elements to work with as far as our need for what we say in Latin America, autocrítica, our own self-criticism of our own traditions. We've heard a very strong call, I think 3 times, about a caveat about ultimate truth claims, that we are not owners of the truth, but witnesses to the truth. And the whole issue of violence, I think that calls us together about understanding that violence is sometimes understood as the colonization of the other, be it countries, regions, or persons. And so I just think it's just a moment to celebrate the fact that we are coming around these issues together with a vision, with a shared vision, with instruments and declarations that we lift up as articulations of this vision that we work on together, and that bring into the fore persons who are normally blocked out, brutalized, or invisibilized by the powers that be. And so we wanted to thank each of the panelists, and particularly for this coming together to define and seek a world in which we can all flourish. We must learn how to take our differences and turn them into strengths. I think that's part of our challenges today and in the future. And also in order to translate these processes, these instruments, and this vision into local initiatives, into a plan of action, into ways of working together. The use of human rights instruments, for example, which we do in Latin American Council of Churches with gender justice. They're wonderful ways that we can find a synthesis, a new path, and a way to walk together. And so thank you, because I think the vision that we're holding up, to paraphrase the World Social Forum, another world is possible, desirable, and urgently necessary. Thank you.
Reverend Van Astel, thank you. We turn now to you, Ms. Katie Saar, for your response, please.
I would just like to say that I will be speaking on behalf of the private sector. As a representative of the private sector, which is evolving in the implementation of management software in all types of companies, commercial and industrial enterprises, NGOs, I can affirm that the world of business is the best example of daily multicultural and multi-religious cohabitation in peace. I was born in a country where 95% of the population is Muslim, and the then president of the republic was Christian. This country is Senegal. In this country, the calendar refers both to Christian and Muslim holidays, which are days off for the entire population, whatever their religion. Private Catholic schools sometimes have more Muslim students for whom there are classes in morality and religion, while Catholic students have classes in catechism. These students still become believing and practicing Muslims, but they also have respect for differences of the other. In this same country, Senegal, ethnic tension is avoided by using a common language, which all ethnicities have in common, and which allows them to overcome conflicts. There's also the concept of ethnic cousins, which goes back to our ancestors and allows ethnicities to face off in words, but then laugh afterwards because everyone is afraid that misfortune will come to them if they seriously go after someone else. This concept makes it possible to diffuse conflicts. But often Muslims forget about the role of the Prophet Jesus, that Jesus and the Virgin Mary are part of the Quran. Was this information consciously left out of their education to maintain a duality? Aside from any attempt at interpretation of Muslims who are Mariama, do they know that they have the name of the Virgin Mary? And Musa Muslims, the name of the Prophet Moses, and Isa, the name of Jesus? When we are born, we are not born into a religion, but a group of individuals, and we develop and take ownership of this culture. This accepting the other is a prerequisite for any interreligious dialogue, and it is important to listen. Learning must begin at home, and from birth, then continued at school and society as in active life as teachers, policymakers, etc., the interreligious and intercultural dialogue challenge of our days must ensure that the children of today become adults of tomorrow who are not trying to succeed, but for whom coexistence of religion and culture is natural. Thank you.
We thank you, Ms. Sarah, and we thank all of the respondents. It is my pleasure now to open the floor for interactive exchange. I implore the participants to be as brief as possible and to observe that I will use the sweet-sounding bell to help us continue what has really been a remarkable attempt by all to cooperate together with a short period of time. So I hereby open the floor. I welcome all who would like to make a response to do so. I call upon you, sir, the representative of the government of Egypt. Welcome you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, the points made by the panel and the respondents were, I think, very deep and very important. And I would like a few ideas came to my mind while listening to them that I would like to share with you. First of all, the dialogue, as was said by the panelists, is not an aim in itself. The dialogue is there to reach understanding and better relations between communities of different religions. So, in my view, the dialogue is not between the religions as faith. Nobody, as was said, should try to convert the others through that dialogue to change his religion or his beliefs or his faith. So it is not only a matter, or it is not at all a matter of a dialogue between the church and the mosque and the temple. It is the dialogue about the respect and the better knowledge of the other. Another point I would like to make is that, as Professor Nita said, there are extremists in every religion, but they are part of the religion, they are part of the community. I disagree with that. I am a Muslim and I don't feel anything in common with those who use the Islamic religion or Islam as a pretext, even if they are in their own logic, if they are sincere. I have nothing in common with those who kill in the name of God. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, esteemed sir. I would like to call on the representative from UNESCO. Madam Katrina, please. Steno.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I am honored, together with my colleagues at UNESCO, to see today culture raised to the top of the political agenda. At the same time, I am troubled by what we see increasingly, which is a trend to consider, or rather to give culture a value which is a cause of all of the evils in the world. We use culture in a spirit which is not the spirit that UNESCO promotes, that is, culture as a source of inspiration, intelligence for the future to create a world which is an obstacle to all of those who go against humanity. You know, it is very difficult to sum up the work of UNESCO in 2 minutes, but building peace in the spirit, in human spirit, is not easy. It is part of time and space. The 5 functions of UNESCO are as a laboratory of ideas, a normative mechanism, a center of exchange of information, a capacity builder, and 5, an international platform for cooperation. These 5 functions correspond to what we want to promote today as soft power, and we, I would say, are excited to see that soft power, which is education and culture and science and communication, is becoming an important element for humanity, because humanity is aware of these difficulties. I would just like to give you one example. of this, one of the functions of UNESCO, that is, as a laboratory of ideas. Everyone thinks that dialogue is a simple exercise among people, an exchange of points of view. And I recalled that the prefix dia means trance, that is, going beyond different ways of thinking to create others. Therefore, dialogue is a spirit, a state of mind. And someone on the panel said that your reality is not mine and the reality of the other may not be true. But when someone says, if everyone were what if everyone were wrong, and then a lot of people would be wrong. But I want to finish by saying that on the one hand, it is important to promote a way of thinking which is cultural diversity, or culture as diversity, so that we do not think that culture and civilization be seen as the only religious component or only in its linguistic component. Culture is much more rich than that, and it evolves, it is dynamic, and we try to promote this loyalty to all of the culture that we belong to. The second thing I would like to say is it is necessary to promote dialogue because humanity is multi-diverse, multicultural. And I want to say finally that UNESCO is celebrating a holiday this year, and I say to Muslims, you ask me who I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me call now upon the representative from India, please.
To explain Ahimsa Yatra. Okay.
Now on Dr. John Taylor, please.
Thank you, Moderator. I'd like to say that from the perspective of an organization that is over 100 years old, working in interfaith work, today is a very important and exciting day. I'd also permit me to say personally, from somebody who's worked for 50 years in this area of interfaith work, I again feel extraordinarily privileged and excited to be here. But I would like to say that despite the exhilaration and the celebration that we feel, I think we must have also a certain cold dose of realism. And already in the very good ways in which the different panelists have addressed issues, we've seen that we are facing a tremendous lot of difficulties and challenges in making this vision work. As far as the United Nations is concerned, I have been privileged to be especially close to the work of the Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, based first in the Human Rights Commission and now in the Human Rights Council. And while there has been great progress in both protecting the victims of violence and discrimination, and also in devising strategies to prevent such violations in the future, we are conscious that neither governments nor even civil society are going sometimes beyond a sort of lip service to the importance of respecting such fundamental freedoms. And there remain recommendations, very clear, constructive recommendations in the area of education, in the area of the status of women, which call upon not only the governments but the religious and the cultural communities themselves to be much more self-critical but also much more proactive in responding to these issues. I hope very much that we shall not just be content with important events like today, but that we shall commit ourselves to long-term action. Somebody today, the government, in fact, of the Philippines, made the good suggestion of a year of international dialogue, and we know that the Europeans are doing this. But now I would like to suggest we go further than that we look in terms of decades, and then beyond a decade we look in terms of long-standing programs. But these can't just be conceived overnight. They have to be conceived and prepared collectively through a long process and a careful process of preparation. But I think we see it beginning today, and for that I'm deeply grateful. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you, Dr. John Taylor. Thank you, Dr. John Taylor. Dr. Azza Karam, the representative of UNFPA, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much to all the distinguished speakers. It has been a genuine pleasure to listen to all of you. I also would like us to pause for a moment to consider the enormity of the moment that we live in, and the very interesting set of things we have heard today about the role of religion and culture in general and specifically in the development process. I want to commend what my colleague and very much compliment what my colleague from UNESCO has just raised. I think it's important to keep in mind, as Mr. Muhammad Ashafa has mentioned, that beyond the talk and beyond the critical though that is, beyond the discourse and the actual realization of the dialogue is extremely critical. And UNFPA, because it deals with issues of health, HIV, AIDS, maternal health, family planning, all the things on which religious people very rarely can find that much common agreement on. But precisely because of such a mandate, it has had very much the privilege of working with religious communities and faith-based organizations consistently for over the last 30 years. And this is an experience that we have, as I said, we consider a privilege. We've learned a great deal from, and we see it as an opportunity to have learned how to actually operationalize the words of wisdom that we heard here today. I also like to bring to the attention of everybody here today that UNFPA is carrying out a sharing of culturally sensitive approaches to programming, which combine a human rights-based approach that the UN has championed for many years with gender equality and with cultural sensitivity, obviously, and that this is an approach that we are training UN country teams in many parts of the world. So we very much wanted to acknowledge to our colleagues from the faith-based communities and from the private sector and from the UN that this is an initiative that is not new, but that is something that the UNFPA is very much committed to and will remain committed to with the help and the partnership of the faith-based communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Azza Karam. I'd call now on the distinguished representative of the Philippines, please.
Just very quickly, I heard about emphasis to local action plans, doing it on the ground. First of all, we have to recognize the fact that on a national level, policy frameworks must be established in order that there will be a lot of work on the local level. And I'll give very specific examples of what we're doing in the Philippines. For example, in the area of education, the national government has already issued issuances that would put peace building and social cohesion in the curriculum of schools in the localities. We have established, although not government, but on the initiative of the bishops and the Muslim imams, the Bishop Ulama Conference, that provides the basic forum on addressing problems on the ground. We are looking towards media to police its own ranks. We know very well the independence that media is so jealous about its work, but we would expect that they would provide the policing work within their own ranks. We have started in the Philippines a Salam soldiers concept. That means soldiers that we send to, for example, areas of conflict. First, if these are Muslim conflict areas, we choose the Muslim soldiers. They're given, we expect that they have the sensitivity and the understanding on the ground. If they are non-Muslim soldiers in Muslim conflict-affected areas, they are provided opportunity to learn the local cultural and religious sensitivities so that when they do their work, they promote more peace than waging war. We're looking at more manifestations of advocacies. For example, the UN forces, if you send them to certain areas, that they be provided the sensitivity required so that they are sensitive to the local religious sensitivities. And we look forward to some experts on interfaith dialogues that could probably be fielded. So these are some of the experiences we have in the Philippine side, and interfaith dialogue is one of the key points of action in the peace process in the Philippines today. Thank you very much.
I would like now to ask our panelists, having heard the interventions from the floor, I would invite them, each with 1 minute, a very short period of time, to do either of one or two things. Either to respond if they've been invited to do so, to a particular question one was raised, or to offer a single point. What would you say is the single most important issue confronting us as we try to take a step forward? I'm going to invite us to begin in inverse order. Imam Ashafa, I'll turn to you first. I'm going to invite you to take 1 minute, and you may hear a sound of a sweet bell, please. Thank you.
For me, from 1873, when the first international interreligious dialogue was held at Washington, D.C., to date, there have been various initiatives across our world, across various regions. But I strongly feel what the UN needs to establish is an advisory council, an interreligious advisory council for this August sitting, to able to facilitate a process that will help in most of religiously motivated conflict around the world. So our religious leaders will serve as professional mediators. They will know how to do it better, most probably, because of the nature of that particular conflict, than others, perhaps. So I strongly feel you need to set up an advisory council for that particular group, for its organs as another arms to help it achieve its goal. And in doing that, to check the extremism in our midst, which the brother talked about, I feel what the UN need to do is to honor those religious leaders who, at the risk of their own life, have taken risks in creating a situation of sanity against the other extreme camps. If they people are being honored, perhaps maybe the university will have that award, or the Alliance for Civilizations, or other organs of UN should have that award, identifying these people at the grassroots level and honoring them. This is a pace which Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding have set a record in that line. Liaising with them will create a new direction for checking extremism in our midst. Thank you very much.
Thank you very kindly. Dr. Gandhi, please, in 1 minute, a way forward.
Half a minute I will take to respond to Mr.
Very good.
Question to what Ahimsa Yatra is. It is being led by an 88-year-old Jain Acharya in India who moves through the areas where communal conflicts have taken place. He took his yatra to Gujarat when it was aflame with communal rights, and he tried to heal the wounds of the people there. It was very effective, and it received support from all sections of religious societies. Now, the second part of half a minute that I had at my disposal is that I would like to end my speech by quoting Irish satirist Jonathan Swift, and I think let us all try to ponder over it. He wrote in the 18th century, "We have enough religion to make us hate, but not enough to make us love." So when religion begins to make us love, then it will be the real beginning of religious understanding. Thank you.
Very much indeed. Professor Suter, please, 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you. Tolerance, understanding, acceptability of diversity, and searching for common grounds are essential for successful intercultural and interreligious cooperation for peace. Commitments of all actors, policymakers, and the governments, as well as auditing of our progress and failures, are essential for such success. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you indeed. Dr. Paul Knitter, please.
Thank you. Well, first, briefly, to try to respond or carry on a conversation with the distinguished gentleman from Egypt. I certainly believe affirm when you say that I have nothing to do with the extremists who are committing violence in the name of my religion, and that has to be said very clear. But I want to say that's not enough. I think what we also have to do is try to engage those extremists and look at how they are using our sacred text, the Bible or the Quran, which we believe in, to justify their religions, because there are passages within our text that do seem to justify violence. And I think we have to deal with those. But my positive statement would be that I think the religions, in responding to the call of the United Nations to come together, are feeling a call that is telling them, listen, the religions can come together not on the basis of their shared religious beliefs, because those can be very, very different. We have to talk about them, but they can be very, very different. But what is calling the religions of the world together today, and the United Nations is articulating that call, are the suffering ones of this earth. The people who are suffering when they don't need to suffer, suffering because of injustice, and the suffering earth itself. Let the religions come together in their shared commitments to deal with suffering. Act together. Really act together as in a shared commitment to trying to deal and remove this suffering, and then that can be the basis for a religious dialogue. After they come together as brothers and sisters in responding to suffering, that gives them the ability to feel their religious relatedness, and then they can start talking about their beliefs.
Thank you very much. We turn to you now, Ms. Shermatova, please.
I would like to say that I came from far away, from a small city in Siberia, a very tiny city, where out of the community of indigenous peoples the group is called Altai, and when I set off to participate in this dialogue, the members of our community were very surprised, and they were inspired by the fact that at the level of the United Nations, at such a high level, there is a dialogue on interreligious and intercultural cooperation. And I think that this initiative of the United Nations, in order for the expectations of these people to be fulfilled, these people at the daily level, it is necessary for this dialogue to continue, for there to be concrete measures and programs, so that this doesn't just end with our discussion today, but it continues.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all who have spoken. I bring our attention back to the distinguished representative of Egypt and the interactions that occurred among the panelists here. Those dealt with the questions of superiority, of exclusion. And there are other approaches that are in many ways modeled by the United Nations. If we would analyze the number of languages spoken in this room, we would recognize that there are indeed many. I think today our religious communities are learning to become bilingual in a very fundamental sense. The Islamic community retains its rich and extraordinary primary language, and so do the Buddhists, so do the Hindus, so do the Christians, the Jews, the Jains, the Sikhs, the Baha'is, and others. And yet they know they can't speak simply among their own. They can't speak just among their own about the issues that are of common concern. So indeed, the religious communities, and it's one of the extraordinary developments of our age, and this is true of cultures in general, are learning indeed to become bilingual. And it's that second language, that public language, which is the language of shared care, deeply held and widely shared care about the fundamental challenges that confront our human family, that I think indeed is the reorientation of the religious communities and opens them for the partnership that the United Nations itself invites for all of us. So it's in that spirit that I think these interventions invite us all further. I make a very final concluding remark. I do so mindful of the diversity of cultures, the diversities of religions. I do also mindful of the fact that there is extraordinary cooperation going on. Cooperation across cultures, cooperation among religious communities, cooperation across sectors, the United Nations, governments, and other sectors. Any of us who have been privileged to be where half of our human family lives on less than $2 a day knows very well that this cooperation is going forward. Many of us have been in situations of extreme conflict, and we know very well that cooperation is going forward. It needs to be advanced. The words of religion are almost embarrassing. Even to say them publicly in public language is almost embarrassing. It's being in love in an unrestricted fashion, having no restrictions, having no block to what you care about. And in a very dark period, that reality that the religions know as spirituality is simply priceless. It's the ability to bear the unbearable, it's the ability to forgive the unforgivable, and it's the ability to find hope where there don't appear to be any grounds for hope. It's almost embarrassing to speak in such immediate and direct language, but that is the language of our religious communities. It's the most intimate language of our cultures. And today we learn how to transpose that deepest heritage into a public language, one appropriate for our United Nations, where we can forge partnerships for the common good. To all our distinguished panelists, to our respondents, and to those who responded on the floor, and to all here, thank you very much. This session is concluded. The remarks that are part of this session will indeed be, as was noted by the President of the General Assembly, will be included in an appropriate way in the workings of the United Nations here. I now invite the speakers of panel 2 and its distinguished moderator, His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Ahmed Mohammed Al-Murad, Permanent Representative of Kuwait to the United Nations, to take their place at the podium. Thank you all. Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Very well done. Didn't mean to be so loud.
Okay, please. You can come this way. You can come this way, please. Okay.
لو سمحتم.
Could you please take your seats? We are now going to start this part of our meeting. Kindly take your seats. We shall now start the second panel of our discussion. It is entitled Best Practices and Strategies of Interreligious and Intercultural Cooperation Going Forward. I have the pleasure here to welcome all of you in this panel, which is going to discuss, as I mentioned, best practices and strategies of interreligious and intercultural cooperation. I believe that you all are aware of the General Assembly Resolution 61/221 about encouraging dialogue and understanding between faiths for the purposes of peace, and also Resolution 61/269 in May about the high-level dialogue currently ongoing about interfaith dialogue and cooperation for peace. I don't want to take a long time in my introductory remarks because I would like my fellow speakers to start discussing their topics, and so I only would like to present to you my colleagues who will be speaking in this panel. First, Madame Gerardette Philippe, representative of the Islamic College of Advanced Studies, religious and a religious nun of the Sacred Heart. And second, Ms. Georgette Bennett, president and founder of the Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding in the United States of America. Our third speaker will be Reverend Carlos Tamez, representative of the Comunidad Teológica de Honduras in Honduras. The fourth speaker will be Ms. Mitra Deliri, representative of the Baha'i International Community and Director of External Affairs Office of the Baha'is of Tanzania. And finally, Mr. Ephenius Henderson, Chief Diversity Officer in the Weyerhaeuser Company in the United States. There will also be a number of respondents who will comment on the presentations, and they are Professor Stephen Rockefeller, co-chair of the Earth Charter International in the United States, Sister Francesca Ngozi Uti, representative of the Center for Women's Studies and Intervention in Nigeria, Dr. Joseph Boli, coordinator of the UNESCO Chair in Interfaith Studies at the University of Birmingham, United Kingdom, Mr. Tatsuya Yoshioka, director of the Peace Boat, Japan, and finally, Ms. Fatima Ahmed, executive director of the Zainab Institute for Women in Development in Sudan. There are also other invited guests, and they are Mr. Qamar Al-Huda from the Center for Religious Studies in Pakistan, and Mr. George Dialogue from the Religious Freedom Office in Switzerland. And there is the members of the Working Group and Civil Society, Mr. Ari Alexander, Administrative Director of the Ibn Abraham Office in the United States, Mr. Abraham of the Shanti Ashram in India, Mr. Edrovik of the Deutsche Office in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Mr. Hero Sakurai of the incoming president of the NGO religious organization. I will start by giving the floor to the first speaker, and that is Sister Gerardette Phillips.
I'm very blessed to be here. Thank you. We are in the holy month of Ramadan, and I would like to share an experience that I had in this month, only because it shows us how our hearts long for peace. Peace is intelligence of the heart. It was in the year 1995 when a Christian boy in Pakistan was to be sentenced to death because he had scribbled graffiti on the walls of a mosque. On the night he was to be sentenced, the university in Delhi, where I was studying, invited the staff and students to pray and break the fast. The women prayed for the boy to be freed and given back to his mother. The next day before dawn, students were at my doorstep asking for passages from the Bible on forgiveness, compassion, and peace. And the next day when I arrived at the university, there were passages from the Quran and the Bible with the message that the boy in Pakistan was free. The women in Delhi knew and had their deep faith that their prayer would free the boy in Pakistan, but they did not know that they brought the essence of two world religions together. War in the name of religion and its effects brings us to a time to remember our true nature, our true peace. And in that light, I offer you 4 practices and 4 strategies as a way of interreligious and intercultural cooperation going forward. And so, the first practice is relax. We usually think that when we are with people of another culture or another faith, we need to be different. We need to do something. We are not relaxed in each other's presence. When we are relaxed, the eternal spirit is free to act, and we meet at the deepest level of each other's religion and culture in trust and freedom without fear. And this takes us to our second practice. Be not afraid. Fear is stifling, and we know that only love can dispel fear. But to love, we need to learn to see ourselves the way others see us. How can we do this? Our third practice will be an aid. Return to the center. We can only penetrate into the inner mysteries of the other if we are daring enough to return to our own center, to that which is most inward. This means to return to our own hearts and find in there the quiet truth of who we are. This can happen with our fourth practice. Encounter the religion of the heart. The heart of religion is the religion of the heart, wherein all external forms are transcended. It is here that we find the eternal wisdom or Sophia, whose brilliance shines forth from the center of every divine message. In this time of hostility towards each other, only this wisdom can give to us the light of harmony and the warmth of compassion and love. And just as I offered you 4 practices of relax, be not afraid, return to the center, and encounter the religion of the heart, I offer you 4 strategies. Our first is to live the message. In the Holy Quran it says, say, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, O people of the scripture, come to a word that is just between us and you, that we worship none but God. The meaning of this is a common platform, kalimatun sawa. How do we come to this common platform? If Muslims and Christians learn to live from the depth of their own revelation, then this gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction. Our second strategy is an open integrity. If followers of each religion claim to have the truth and be committed to that truth, the question then that follows is, can people of different faiths and cultures learn to truly listen to each other? The challenge is to learn how to cross religious and cultural frontiers while preserving our own integrity. However, for us to have an open integrity, we need to have communion. And this takes us to our third strategy of communion beyond dialogue. To live in open integrity, we need this communion. Human beings are created in God's image to give each other life and to be in communion. However, our dialogue is not based on communion, but on mutual justification. This does not solve conflicts, but deepens them. For us to be in true cooperation, there has to be an inclusive we to communion. Perhaps the last strategy that follows will enable us to be in this communion, to make the words of Jesus our own, may they be one. And our last strategy is to negate the negative. The light of faith in our traditions gives us a map that helps us to orient ourselves in the chaotic situation of our present world. However, for us to be able to do this free from prejudices, our best strategy is to negate the negative. We need not to believe in the worst of each other, but in the best. We need to instill in our world an energy that will awaken the consciousness to a goodness that exists in our world, especially relationships among Muslims and Christians. In this way, we are molding our present times according to what we know and believe, and most importantly, giving hope to our children who so deserve it. Our opening story had to do with the boy who experienced forgiveness. Like those women of faith who reminded us of this sacred duty during the month of Ramadan, may we go forward in a spirit of openness to forgiveness, to meet in deeper communion. For us to go forward, let the women teach us the intelligence of their hearts. Thank you.
أشكر الأخت جورجيتا فيليب والآن أعطي الكلمة
I would like to thank Mrs. Georgette Phillips. And now I'll give the floor to Dr. Georgette Bennett. You have the floor.
Delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me first of all start by wishing our Muslim brothers and sisters a Ramadan Mubarak. And because today is also an important Jewish holiday, I wish all of our Jewish brothers and sisters a Shana Tova and Chag Sameach. As many of the panelists and respondents said in the previous panel, the misuse of religion within and between member states is one of the greatest threats to stability facing the world today. But rather than seeing religion as a source of conflict, the Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding has found ways that religion is a resource for reducing conflict. I founded the Tannenbaum Center in 1992 to build on the pioneering work of my late husband, Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum. Mark was a world-renowned leader in interreligious and intercultural cooperation, and today, 15 years after his death, I'm proud that the Tannenbaum Center is a trusted resource and a leader in providing the practical programs, and this is an issue that came up in panel one, that are so urgently needed to reduce religion-based tensions and violence. We offer programs in education, such as the ones that the representative from the Philippines mentioned earlier, in workplaces and health care, but the program that I'm here to discuss with you today is our Religion and Conflict Resolution Program. We've created a network of religiously motivated peacemakers, and you met one of them in the first panel, Imam Ashafa, who are working on the ground. And this is also a theme that was very important in the first panel. They're working on the ground in areas of armed conflict. These men and women work at great risk without the support and recognition that they deserve. And I hope by bringing them to your attention, to the member states, that they will begin to get that recognition and support. But their intercultural and interreligious peacemaking methods are highly effective and require our close attention. In addition to strengthening these peacemakers' brave efforts through training and resources, Tannenbaum studies their work and identifies their most effective strategies. Our latest book, Peacemakers in Action, Profiles of Religion and Conflict Resolution, published by Cambridge University Press, profiles the first 16 of these peacemakers and their best practices, which we have outlined for you in the materials that are at the desk, because there is not enough time to go through all the best practices in these 5 minutes. But the book is a guide for diplomats and policymakers on how to use local religious peacemakers as vital grassroots partners in fostering interreligious and intercultural cooperation. Let me just share a few examples with you. In Northern Ireland, peacemakers Father Alex Reid and the Reverend Roy McGee used their moral authority to work behind the scenes to advance their country's peace process. serving their Catholic and Protestant communities respectively when the Troubles first broke out, they spoke to their people. They saw that both victims and perpetrators, paramilitary leaders and government officials, all of them were sitting in their pews on Sunday. They were all in church on Sundays. So by being present to their people in the streets, Father Reed and the Reverend McGee gained credibility with their constituencies, and the key links that they forged would prove instrumental in the peace process. So by drawing on the trust and respect that they had gained, the men brought opposing factions face to face, often for the first time. Their mediating work led to the IRA ceasefire, which was followed by a ceasefire on the loyalist paramilitary side, and eventually the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. In Ethiopia, peacemaker Dr. Ephraim Isaac invigorated his country's centuries-old traditions by mobilizing community elders to serve as mediators and negotiators in conflicts. As a Yemenite Jew in a majority Christian country, he knows that people respond best when they hear a call to peace from their own traditions. So during the Ethiopian-Eritrean conflict, he mobilized a multi-religious network of respected elders whose efforts helped to negotiate a peace that replaced the oppressive Derg regime and resulted in Eritrean autonomy in 1993. And just a few weeks ago, Ephraim organized a council of elders and negotiated the release of political opposition leaders in Ethiopia. Now, the elders came from different religious backgrounds and professions, but had unmatched credibility throughout the country due to their spiritual leadership and the Ethiopian tradition of eldership. In southern Sudan, Reverend Bill Lowry drew on the local Nuer and Dinka tribal traditions to build a peace agreement. Bill Lowry, who traveled to South Sudan, gained the trust of the Nuer and the Dinka and became part of the community where he discovered the deep wisdom and power of the tribal practices. Adapting their shared interreligious and intercultural rituals and symbolism, Bill established a series of people-to-people peace conferences through the New Sudan Council of Churches in 1998. At the end of the conferences, the Dinka and Nuer signed a covenant to end their tribal war. They sealed it by sacrificing a bull, which signifies wealth for both of the tribes, and by stepping over the bull, they publicly sealed their commitment to a new peace. Now, the UN General Assembly resolution that guides today's hearing states that all cultures, religions, and civilizations share a common set of universal values and can all contribute to the enrichment of humankind. Our peacemakers use the best practices and strategies for tapping into these shared values. They apply the trust and authority offered by religious and cultural traditions to build cultures of peace and reconciliation. And their successes, which are described in the book, prove that local religious peacemakers are key actors and important partners in diplomacy today. As religious intolerance and extremism threaten world security, representatives of the United Nations, government, and civil society can find solutions by paying attention to the work of these local religious peacemakers. We all must work to better support their efforts, provide them with the safe space to do their work, and, when appropriate, to ensure their place at the tables of diplomacy, because Track 2 diplomacy is the essential ingredient for Track 1 diplomacy to succeed. I thank you for your time today and encourage you to pay attention to these remarkable religiously motivated individuals. They provide us with a roadmap to making interreligious respect and cooperation that reality that you heard one of the respondents speak to earlier.
شكرا جزيلا دكتورة جوي.
Thank you, Dr. Georgette Bennett. I now give the floor to Mrs. Mitra Deliri.
أنا آسف يا سيدي.
I apologize, Mr. Carlos. I correct the name, Mr. Reverend Carlos Tamez.
I would like, with the deepest gratitude, to welcome the holding of this tremendous event, for it demonstrates the coming of new times and roads of hope towards world peace. This is obviously part of the political decisions of governments and societies to transform these large events in local events that are held at the level of communities. The interreligious and intercultural dialogue during these times of globalization means opening space for the meeting of the different actors in civil society, different religions and spiritual movements, governments, international service entities, and private bodies, which all together, but also from each one's different perspective and action, can guarantee that there be peace, justice, and world harmony among the different societies. This is why we need to find paradigms that will bring together these religious and intercultural processes to join together different dreams and spiritualities to achieve peace. And we welcome the impact of the holding in the ecumenical world of the World Day of Prayer for Peace on 21 September, which coincides with the World Day of Peace of the United Nations. Intercultural and interfaith dialogue is an imperative. It cannot be postponed if we wish to sustainably create and develop peace. Peace promoted from the perspective of a new spirituality, harmony, and dialogue among the various religions and cultural contexts will inspire and contribute to peace throughout the world because of its character, mission, and its vocation to overcome barriers of hatred, exclusion, and injustice. We must meld the efforts of all social actors in different parts of the world, whether they are religious, political, or civilian, to build on the basis of different processes of communication, education, and culture, inspired by a profound political will, to build a world that can live together on the basis of love, dialogue, solidarity, and respect for differences, with relationships framed by equity and justice. And this will be possible if we can transform these concepts, values, and symbols, if we can translate them into concrete action in the life of the community. We are challenged to build a peace on the assertion and reaffirmation that the dignity of every single human being, with no exclusions whatsoever on religious, cultural, social, or political grounds, is our horizon throughout all types of human relationships in any geographical context. And this means crafting inclusive domains with the full exercise of participation and plurality in decision-making. We mustn't forget that full and sustainable development for our nations is based on interculturality, and it has an important part to play in the political debate in these countries. And this is what is important in building the peace through dialogue. The World Council of Churches since 2001 has launched the Decade to Overcome Violence. The churches and communities of faith and movements see that there is a global movement to consolidate the efforts and existing networks to overcome violence and to inspire the creation of new religious movements and other alliances to build the peace. The Decade to Overcome Violence highlights and combines the efforts of communities of faith, ecumenical organizations, and movements in civil society to overcome the different types of violence. Along with the Decade to Overcome Violence, we have the International Ecumenical Convention that will be held in the year 2011. It is designed to bear witness to God's peace as a gift and the responsibility of the oikumene. It is a matter of evaluating and strengthening the position of communities of faith as regards creating peace, creating networks of contacts, and deepening our common commitment to peace and reconciliation. Some interfaith and intercultural initiatives for peace and conviviality are based on elements sensitive to the different religions. Within the Global Environmental Citizenship Program of the Latin American Council of Churches, we have developed different forms of participation based on topics related to human survival, leaving behind old confrontations of a religious nature and joining together new spiritualities. Joint declarations have been crafted to bring a new dialogue for peace and human conviviality. The UNFPA of the United Nations has a project in Honduras to prevent HIV/AIDS and provide reproductive health and sexuality education, for which it set up a national interreligious committee as part of the process, and local interreligious committees in the main cities of the country. Since the year 2004, more than 30 interfaith forums have been held to bring about consensual positions and create a fruitful interreligious dialogue on items of common interest for the harmony within family, society, and religion. Joining this to what is being done in different parts of the world and by the different agencies of the United Nations reflects, as we've said, that we're now living in new times and we're opening new avenues of hope on the basis of peace, tolerance, and the construction of world harmony and understanding. We appeal to everyone not to remain at the level of words and symbols. We must build together an interreligious and intercultural civilization that will make it possible to open up beyond individualistic or arrogant positions that try to impose absolute truths. We must carry out campaigns about universal values that will become the great concrete values of love, fraternity, solidarity, tolerance, respect among different visions of the universe, cultures, and lifestyles. We have to build networks on strategic alliances between civil society, states, religions, and the agencies and programs that can facilitate dialogue that is based on interreligion and intercultural elements towards a culture of peace in the world.
I thank the speaker, and I apologize for the inadvertent mistake just a moment ago. And I would like to mention that I would be appreciative if the speakers would limit themselves to the set amount, which is 5 minutes. And I now give the floor to our next speaker, Ms. Mitra Deliri.
It's indeed great pleasure to be here today. I live in Tanzania, a country whose large Christian and Muslim populations live side by side, intermarry and celebrate each other's religious festivals. It is a living example of religious pluralism. This coexistence did not come about by accident. but rather as a result of the vision and deliberate action of Tanzanian leaders, dating back to the country's first president, the late Julius Nyerere. He succeeded in planting the seeds of harmony and instilling in citizens the sense of a common humanity. The use of Kiswahili as a national language further helped to cement a national unity. Overall, the educational reforms, policies promoting equity, the banning of political campaigning along religious lines, and establishment of a unified judiciary have laid the foundation for a peaceful coexistence of diverse religious believers. The protection of the right to freedom of conscience, religion, or belief is central to the success of efforts to build understanding among religious groups. The freedom to hold beliefs of one's choosing and to change them is a fundamental attribute of human conscience. This right is not only contingent on the state's protection, but also on the exposure to new ideas, as well as a climate in which information and beliefs are openly shared. Such a climate must be free from incitements to violence or hostility in the name of religion. Where contentious opinions about religions are expressed, it is the responsibility of the state to provide for right of reply. As a minimum standard, both sides must be afforded the right to respond in a peaceful manner so as to allow the public to arrive at their own conclusion. It is in this climate that understanding and cooperation can take root. I would like to offer the following strategies for the interfaith cooperation. 1. A universal mandatory educational policy and curriculum on religion and education will be most instrumental to countering ignorance and fanaticism. Education about religions serves to promote cohesion and builds moral values and moral reasonings into the curriculum. Such an education helps children to affirm their own identity while leading them to an informed understanding of the religious identities of others. Consistent with international agreements, this approach should not promote particular religion, but engage religion as an important dimension of human life. South Africa's national policy on religion and education is one example of such an initiative. 2, United Nations could use the media and its UN regional agencies to further extend the frontiers of global understanding. For example, UN could support local interfaith groups to launch inclusive interfaith radio and TV programs and empower young people to be proponents of peace and not war. 3, UN could prepare and disseminate case studies of activities that stimulate intercultural and interfaith dialogue. 4, United Nations could undertake comprehensive research on underlying reasons for the sufferings of marginalized groups, barriers inhibiting interreligious cooperation, and key indicators for social cohesion and active citizenship. 5, United Nations could develop a code of conduct for interreligious cooperation that is approved by religious authorities. 6, United Nations could arrange for a meeting with heads of state, present them with the findings of the above research, and consult on strategies to address the issues. 7, United Nations could foster social cohesion by encouraging interfaith prayer gatherings. In conclusion, there is a need for more deliberate efforts to foster understanding between governments, the United Nations, and religious organizations at decision-making level by familiarizing themselves with precepts of the other religions. What, after all, is the purpose of religion, if not to enlighten and to unite? If religion then becomes the cause of division, dislike, and conflict, would it not be better to be without it? In a world so divided against itself, it is in those voices and practices that help us to come together that need to be echoed and amplified, no matter their label, no matter their source. Thank you for your attention.
وشكرا على التوقيت الجيد.
Thank you for having remained within the allotted time, and I now give the floor to the next speaker, which is Mr. Ephanus Henderson. You have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, on Weyerhaeuser Company's behalf, I am honored for this opportunity to address a high-level dialogue session of the United Nations General Assembly on interreligious and intercultural understanding and cooperation for peace. I will focus my remarks on one theme: collaborative leadership, a new mindset for tackling global issues. I've been asked to talk about best practices and lessons I've learned as the diversity director of a major corporation, and how these lessons might contribute to a healthy dialogue on global peacemaking. Oh, sorry for that. But before I talk about best practices, I would like to share a personal story. Part of the global dialogue is an understanding of who we are and the cultures and the religions and the experiences that have shaped our lives. It starts in our families. I grew up on a small farm in rural North Carolina in the United States. Shortly after I turned 13, I experienced a significant family event that altered my childhood and perhaps led me to my career in corporate diversity and to this podium today. My mother, 39 years old at the time, was dying in our home from a disease called lupus, much like many mothers in Africa are dying from AIDS today. As the disease progressed, she moved from our house to a nearby hospital. When she was about to leave, she called me aside and handed me a handkerchief with a collection of dollars and loose change totaling about $19. It was all she possessed, and she gave it to me for safekeeping. A few days later, she died, one day after my youngest brother turned 1 year old. That evening, I quietly retrieved the handkerchief from where I kept it and handed it to my father. In doing so, I passed on my mother's small legacy and recognized my father as the man who would lead our poor family of 12. And he did pull us together, and we did move forward. And though at the time angry and depressed, I questioned my God for taking my mother, it was our faith and her legacy of love that bound us together. Now you may be asking, what does a story of a grief-stricken boy in rural North Carolina have to do with the issues of corporate and global diversity? I think the connection is clear. Like a family that has experienced a devastating loss, we must acknowledge that we all share a common destiny. If we are to solve some of our most pressing global problems, such as displacement, disease, climate change, we must adopt a mindset that is open to diverse perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences. As a Weyerhaeuser representative, I've participated in a number of intercompany collaborations on a range of human resource topics with one goal in mind: to make business operations more inclusive. But achieving this requires more than teaching documented best practices and strategies which leaders and employees may carry out in a rote and detached way. Achieving diversity requires a mindset that genuinely understands the stark necessity of collaborative approaches to solving problems. As a young boy, I realized only my father could lead my family from a place of sorrow to restoration and wholeness. To solve emerging global issues, it's equally important to acknowledge the role business leaders play. I've recently supported the work of Business Opportunities for Leadership Diversity, or BOLD as it is called, where CEOs and diversity officers of major companies came together to plan strategies, common strategies, that advance inclusion goals. The imperative is clear. Leaders must model a spirit of inclusiveness so that diverse viewpoints are encouraged, voiced, and heard. In addition to leadership, the value of collaboration among corporations, NGOs, civil rights, religious and environmental groups must be recognized and encouraged. Collaboration, however, is built on trust, and historically, trust between business executives and social activists is in short supply. On this front, I'm pleased to report that we are seeing progress. Both corporations and NGOs are beginning to realize they need each other, especially in developing countries. For corporations, working with NGOs can enhance their reputation and open doors to new markets. And NGOs benefit from business practices that increase efficiencies and accelerate the eradication of poverty. Finally, I'd like to address the issue of limited resources, often an argument for intransigence on critical issues. I think this can best be illustrated with an example of corporate and NGO cooperation between Weyerhaeuser and CARE International. In the year 2000, the Weyerhaeuser Company Foundation and CARE International formed a long-term partnership to promote sustainable forestry. The partnership began its work in Nepal, where an over-reliance on forest resources compromised the region's environmental integrity. With company grants, CARE implemented literacy programs for women, held classes on sustainable forestry practices, and supported the development of farm products that could be sold at local markets. Over time, villagers began to take control of their economic future without depleting valuable natural resources. When my mother handed me a handkerchief containing her worldly savings of $19, she left her family a small but invaluable resource that took us to a place where we could heal, work together, and prevail. To survive, we had to work together. Similarly, strategic corporate grants in the hands of knowledgeable and committed people can transform struggling communities around the world. To move forward as a unified community of men and women, we must trust in our collective power to shape the future in these deeply troubling times, even if the future appears as bleak and uncertain as it did for me when I was a 13-year-old boy. Indifference and despair will only divorce us from our common humanity. The alternative is to go forward, to embrace the value inherent in our religious, racial, and cultural differences. In doing so, we will tap the leadership, creativity, and political momentum essential to strengthening peacekeeping efforts, eradicate poverty, and protect the resources of an endangered planet. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We have now finished with the first group of speakers, and we will move now to the respondents. We will begin. I give the floor to Professor Stephen Rockefeller. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, Ambassador Al-Murad, Excellencies, brothers and sisters, it is an honor to be part of this high-level panel. Among the many issues addressed by the panel speakers, they have emphasized our common humanity and the need to promote shared values. They have provided us with inspiring examples of social and ecological responsibility and peacemaking. They have called attention to the religion of the heart, the deep spirituality that is the wellspring of our great religious traditions and the source of compassion, love, healing, and reconciliation. Building upon what has been said in this regard, I would like to highlight the importance of ethics and of clarifying and acting upon our shared values. In short, my message is promote global ethics in the midst of our rich cultural and religious diversity as a core strategy. Our ethical values define what we consider to be right and wrong, good and bad, in human conduct and in our relations with each other and the larger community of life. Our ethics reflect what kind of person we choose to be and what quality of community life we choose to sustain. Shared values are what make community and cooperation possible. In an increasingly interdependent world where our major challenges can only be addressed in and through international cooperation, shared values and global ethics are essential. One of the most significant achievements of the United Nations over the past 60 years has been the gradual construction in and through dialogue of a new global ethic, beginning with the UN Charter and Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Many UN resolutions affirm the existence of universal values. The challenge is to continue the process of constructing a global ethic in response to the world's needs and suffering, and to instill in all people and each new generation an understanding and appreciation of and commitment to this ethical framework. In conclusion, I want to call your attention to the Earth Charter, which is an important civil society contribution to the development of a new global ethic. It is a declaration of fundamental principles for building a just, sustainable, and peaceful world that builds on and extends the shared values affirmed in international law. The Earth Charter consultation and drafting process is an instructive model of a very successful worldwide intercultural and interreligious dialogue on shared values. The Earth Charter's inclusive ethical framework for sustainable living and building a global culture of tolerance, nonviolence, and peace is a valuable teaching tool and guide to action that is being used throughout the world by schools, universities, governments, and NGOs, including UNESCO and IUCN. It is a valuable resource in advancing the dialogue on shared values and in building support for global ethics and cooperation for peace. Thank you very much.
Shukran.
Thank you, and I would like to remind the speakers that they have 2 minutes to respond. I would like to give the floor now to Sister Francesca Neguzzi. Madam, you have the floor.
The need to find a basis for cooperation over the issues of religion and culture is paramount because these two themes express and define the essence of our being. In whatever shape or form it is expressed, we are in a sense all religious or cultural. This may be expressed in different and even conflicting forms. Conflicting signals create tensions and lead to misunderstanding, quarrels, and often spill into violence. Religion and culture are the most important meeting points in human activities, and thus it is important that we come to terms with those aspects of our faith and culture that cause offense or can lead to misunderstanding. Some religious or cultural norms, not properly understood, can be considered by others as offensive. Our presenters have made very important points. Dr. Bennett gave the example of how we can use our position and authority to end conflict and bring about peace. How we can use community elders to serve as mediators and negotiators in conflicts. Draw on local tribes' traditions to build cooperation. Sister Gerardette talked on the need for a deep appreciation and understanding of other people's religion and culture. There is a need to be free and at home with our religion wherever we are. Deleri talked about a universal educational policy and curriculum on religion that will counter ignorance and fanaticism. According to Afenus Henderson, inclusivity is very important. We are all different and from different backgrounds and experiences. The UN system is the greatest expression of the fact that our differences can be better harmonized when we find a common umbrella. For greater collaboration and collaboration between main actors' programs and the initiatives of interreligious and intercultural groups in the United System, greater trust and respect need to be built. More often than not, we fear what we do not understand, and this fear leads to prejudice. Perception then becomes the basis for the suspicion of the other. To illustrate this point, I recall a story of two widowers, one English and the other a Chinese. By some accident, both their wives had been buried in the same graveyard and may have shared the same anniversary. For on the day in question, both men appeared to pay respect to their loved ones. The Englishman brought out his bouquet of flowers and carefully began to tend them around his wife's tomb with much care and affection. The Chinese, on the other hand, brought out his bowl of rice and proceeded to sprinkle it on the grave of his loved wife. Suddenly, the Englishman looked over the Chinese man and in shock asked, "My friend, what are you doing? How could you waste a precious plate of rice on the grave of a dead person? When do you imagine that your wife can ever come out to eat this rice?" The Chinese man wistfully looked at the Englishman and said, "Well, who knows? When your wife wakes up to smell your flowers, she might see my wife eating her rice." Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Dr. Joseph Boyle.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, a good and balanced education has been frequently mentioned as being a key factor to overcome religious prejudices and stereotypes of the others, of all those who hold different worldviews or beliefs. The great challenge today is to move beyond an either exclusively secular education with little sensitivity and knowledge about diverse religious traditions, or, on the other hand, a religious education that only advocates one particular religion over and above all other religions. In many countries, religious education includes some reference to the plurality of religions, however, often in a biased way. Some countries do not even allow the teaching of other religions. Clearly, there are deep and often unresolved challenges ahead of us all. What could be the ways forward? Let me mention some very brief points. Governments need to ensure an objective, balanced and well-informed education respecting the inalienable rights of each of their citizens. Religious leaders should be encouraged by all concerned to seek encounters and dialogue with those from other traditions. UNESCO has a special role to play, being the lead agency to address educational, cultural and scientific issues within the United Nations system. For example, the UNESCO chairs based at many universities in all regions of the world, each offering a specific expertise rooted in a local context, by contacts with many other universities and networks. Those UNESCO chairs need to be strengthened and better resourced. Therefore, I would like to call on governments, UN agencies and foundations to support the existing chairs, invite them to conferences, consultations and into education programs. The UNESCO chair in interfaith studies based at the University of Birmingham is a part of those chairs. Lastly, many international interreligious organizations have been developed over